The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Hartford mansion as William paced the length of his study. His footsteps echoed on the polished wooden floor, each step marking another moment of the decision that had been building for months. At 45, William Hartford had built an empire from nothing, turning a small family business into one of the country's largest corporations. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was about the two women who had shaped his life in ways he never expected. Margaret sat in the leather chair by the fireplace, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal glass of wine. Even in the dim light, she looked every inch the woman who had stood beside him for 15 years. Her blonde hair was pulled back in the same elegant style she had worn since their wedding day, and her blue dress was chosen with the same careful precision she applied to everything in their life together. She had been his partner through the lean years, the woman who had believed in him when no one else would. But Margaret had changed, or maybe William had finally opened his eyes to who she really was. "You're going to wear a hole in that expensive rug," Margaret said without looking up from her wine. Her voice carried the same cold tone that had become her trademark over the past 2 years. "Whatever you're planning to tell me, just say it." William stopped pacing and turned to face her. The woman he had once loved sat there like a stranger, beautiful but distant, successful but heartless. Margaret had climbed the social ladder with ruthless determination, leaving behind pieces of herself with each rung. She had become everything she once claimed to despise about the wealthy families they now called friends. "Where do I even begin?" William asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "When did we become these people, Margaret? When did we stop caring about anything except what others think of us?" Margaret finally looked at him, her green eyes sharp and calculating. "We became successful, William. We became the kind of people who matter in this world. I thought that's what you wanted. I wanted us to succeed together. I wanted us to remain who we were." "Who we were?" Margaret laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Who we were was broke and desperate. Who we were was living in that tiny apartment, eating instant noodles and worrying about paying rent. "I refuse to apologize for wanting more than that." William sank into the chair across from her, suddenly feeling older than his years. The fire crackled between them, but it provided no warmth to the conversation. They had had this same argument so many times that the words felt worn out, like clothes that had been washed too often. "It's not about the money, Margaret. It's about what we sacrifice to get it." "Oh, please." Margaret set her wine glass down with more force than necessary. "Spare me the philosophy lesson. You think I don't know what this is really about? You think I haven't noticed the way you look at her?" The room fell silent except for the rain and the crackling fire. William didn't need to ask who she meant. Elena. The name hung in the air between them like a confession. Elena Rodriguez had come into their lives 6 months ago as the new head of marketing for their company. She was 32, brilliant, and possessed a warmth that seemed to light up every room she entered. More importantly, she reminded William of who he used to be before success had complicated everything. Elena still laughed at simple jokes, still got excited about small victories, still believed that business could be done with integrity and kindness. "Elena has nothing to do with us," William said, but even he could hear how hollow the words sounded. "Doesn't she?" Margaret stood up, her movements sharp and controlled. "You think I'm blind? You think I don't see the way you come alive when she walks into a room? You think I don't notice how you stay late at the office on days when she's working on projects?" William opened his mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because Margaret was right. Elena did make him come alive. She reminded him of dreams he had forgotten and values he had pushed aside. When he talked to Elena about business, it felt like building something meaningful instead of just making money. When she smiled at him, he remembered what it felt like to be genuinely happy instead of just satisfied with his success. "She's a good employee," William said finally, "and a good person. A good person, Margaret repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. How convenient. Tell me, William, what makes her so good? Is it the way she brings coffee to the night security guards? Is it how she remembers everyone's birthdays? Or is it something else entirely? William felt his temper rising. Margaret's ability to make everything sound small and petty had always frustrated him, but tonight it felt unbearable. Yes, all of those things. She treats people with respect. She cares about more than just profit margins and social status. She still has a soul, Margaret. That's what makes her good. The words hit Margaret like a slap. Her face flushed red, and for a moment, William saw a flash of the hurt beneath her anger. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold mask she wore so well. I see, Margaret said quietly. So I've lost my soul. Is that what you think? William looked at his wife, really looked at her, and tried to remember the woman he had fallen in love with. She had been a waitress at a small cafe near his first office, working double shifts to pay for night school. She had been kind to elderly customers, patient with difficult ones, and she had dreams of opening her own restaurant someday. That woman had been full of life and hope and genuine warmth. I don't know, William said honestly. I've been trying to find her for 2 years now. Margaret's composure cracked just slightly. I became what you needed me to become. I learned to dress right, to speak right, to know the right people. I did it for us, William. I sacrificed my dreams so you could achieve yours. I never asked you to do that. You didn't have to ask. I saw what was required. I saw the wives of successful men, and I knew I had to become one of them or risk losing you. William felt a stab of guilt. There was truth in what Margaret said. He had been so focused on building his business that he hadn't noticed Margaret transforming herself to fit into his expanding world. By the time he realized what was happening, the woman he had married was already gone. Maybe we both lost ourselves somewhere along the way, William said softly. Margaret picked up her wine glass again, her hands trembling slightly. Maybe we did. But the question is, what are we going to do about it now? Before William could answer, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from the driveway. Both of them turned toward the window, though they couldn't see anything through the rain-streaked glass. Were you expecting someone? Margaret asked. William's heart began to race. He had asked Elena to come by tonight to discuss the Morrison project. But that was before this conversation with Margaret had begun. He had forgotten completely. It's probably just a delivery, he said, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She walked to the window and peered out into the darkness. A moment later, she turned back to William with a look that could have frozen fire. It's her, isn't it? Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. You invited her here, tonight, while we're having this conversation about our marriage. William felt the walls of his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. He had planned to have this conversation with Margaret and then meet with Elena later to discuss business. He had never intended for the two situations to collide. But life, he was learning, rarely followed his carefully made plans. The doorbell rang, echoing through the mansion like a judgment. Margaret and William stood frozen, staring at each other across the room. Everything they had built together, everything they had become, hung in the balance of this moment. Answer it, Margaret said, her voice deadly calm. Answer it, and let's see what choice you make. William's hand hesitated on the door handle of his study. On the other side of this decision lay two completely different futures. One led back to the life he knew, complicated and cold, but familiar. The other led into unknown territory, towards something that might be better or might destroy everything he had worked for. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Margaret stood watching him, her face a mask of controlled fury and desperate hope. And somewhere beyond that door stood Elena. completely unaware that she was about to walk into the most important moment of three people's lives. William opened the front door to find Elena standing on the porch, rain dripping from her dark hair despite the umbrella she held. She wore a simple black coat over jeans and a sweater, a stark contrast to Margaret's designer dress. Her brown eyes were bright with enthusiasm, and she carried a leather portfolio filled with what he knew would be innovative ideas for the Morrison project. "I'm so sorry I'm late," Elena said, shaking the rain from her umbrella. "The weather is terrible out there. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." William felt his throat tighten. Elena's natural warmth and genuine concern made Margaret's calculated coldness seem even more stark. "No, it's fine. Come in." Elena stepped into the marble foyer, her eyes taking in the opulent surroundings with the same mixture of admiration and discomfort she always showed around excessive wealth. She had grown up in a working-class family and never quite seemed at ease with the luxury that surrounded William's world. "I brought the revised marketing strategy for Morrison," Elena said, holding up her portfolio. "I think you're going to love the community outreach component. It's not just about profit, it's about actually helping people." Before William could respond, Margaret appeared in the doorway of the study. She had composed herself, but William could see the storm brewing beneath her perfect exterior. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Elena," Margaret said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "How lovely to see you. Working late again, I see." Elena's smile faltered slightly. She had always been uncomfortable around Margaret, though she was too polite to show it openly. "Mrs. Hartford, I didn't realize you would be here. I can come back tomorrow if this is a bad time." "Oh, no." Margaret stepped closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Please stay. I'm very interested in hearing about this community outreach project. It sounds so charitable." The way Margaret said the word charitable made it sound like something distasteful. Elena glanced between William and Margaret, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my study," William said quickly, trying to diffuse the situation before it exploded. "Wonderful idea," Margaret said, following them without invitation. "I'd love to hear Elena's ideas." The three of them walked into the study, where the fire still crackled and Margaret's abandoned wine glass sat on the side table like evidence of their earlier argument. Elena took a seat in one of the chairs facing William's desk, while Margaret positioned herself behind William's chair, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. Elena opened her portfolio and began to spread out charts and presentations. Her excitement about the project was genuine and infectious, and William found himself drawn into her vision of a business that could make money while actually making a difference in people's lives. "The beauty of this approach," Elena explained, her eyes lighting up as she spoke, "is that we're not just building shopping centers, we're creating community hubs. Places where people can shop, yes, but also where they can take classes, attend cultural events, and connect with their neighbors." Margaret's fingers tightened on William's shoulder. "How very idealistic," she said. "But what about the profit margins? Surely the shareholders are more interested in returns than in cultural events." Elena's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. "Actually, Mrs. Hartford, studies show that community-oriented developments have higher long-term success rates. When people feel connected to a place, they're more likely to return and recommend it to others." "Studies," Margaret repeated, her voice dripping with condescension. "How academic. But in the real world, sentiment doesn't pay the bills." William felt something snap inside him. Margaret's relentless negativity, her inability to see value in anything that didn't directly serve her interests, suddenly became unbearable. "Actually, Margaret, Elena's approach has already shown measurable results in our pilot projects." Margaret's hand stilled on his shoulder. "I'm sure it has. Elena seems to be very good at convincing you of many things." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Elena looked confused, clearly not understanding the subtext of the conversation. She began gathering her papers, sensing that she had walked into something much larger than a business meeting. "I should go," Elena said quietly. "We can discuss this tomorrow at the office." "No," William said, standing up so abruptly that Margaret's hand fell away from his shoulder. "Don't go." Something in his tone made both women freeze. Margaret moved around to face him, her green eyes narrowing dangerously. "William," Margaret said, her voice carrying a warning, "perhaps Elena would be more comfortable discussing business during office hours." "Why?" William asked, his voice rising. "Because you can't stand to see someone who still believes that business can be about more than just accumulating wealth? Because Elena reminds you of everything you used to be before you decided that kindness was a weakness?" Elena stood up, clearly distressed. "I don't understand what's happening here, but I think I should leave." "You should," Margaret said coldly. "This is a family matter." "Family?" William turned to face Margaret fully, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her step backward. "When did we become a family, Margaret? When did we become anything more than two people living in the same house, pretending to share the same values?" Margaret's composure finally cracked. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed, how dare you speak to me like this in front of her?" "What have you sacrificed, Margaret? Your kindness? Your ability to care about anyone but yourself? Your soul?" William's voice was rising with each word. "You didn't sacrifice those things for me. You threw them away because you thought they were obstacles to getting what you wanted." Elena moved toward the door, but William's next words stopped her. "Elena, wait." He turned to her, and Margaret saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. "You asked me once why I stayed in a marriage that clearly makes me unhappy. Do you remember that conversation?" Elena nodded slowly, her face pale. It had been 3 weeks ago, during a late night at the office. William had seemed so tired, so worn down, that Elena had asked if he was all right. The conversation that followed had been more personal than either of them had intended. "You told me that life was too short to spend it pretending to be happy," William continued. "You said that authenticity was more valuable than security." "William, don't," Elena whispered, understanding now where this was leading. Margaret stepped between them, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare throw away 15 years for some idealistic little girl who thinks the world can be saved with community gardens and recycling programs." William looked at Margaret, really looked at her, and saw clearly for perhaps the first time in years. The woman he had married was gone. Had been gone for so long that he couldn't even remember when he had last seen her. In her place stood someone he didn't recognize, someone whose love had been conditional on success and whose loyalty was measured in social status. "You're right," William said quietly. "Elena does think the world can be made better. She thinks business can have a conscience. She thinks people matter more than profit margins. And you know what, Margaret? She's not wrong." Margaret's face went white. "You're choosing her." William reached for Elena's hand. She didn't pull away, but he could feel her trembling. "I'm choosing myself," he said. "I'm choosing to remember who I used to be before I let success turn me into someone I don't recognize." Margaret stood frozen for a moment, then her expression hardened into something cold and final. "Fine," she said, her voice deadly calm. "But understand this, William. If you walk away from me, from us, you're dead to me, completely and utterly dead." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Elena gasped softly, and even William seemed shaken by the venom in Margaret's voice. But then something shifted in William's expression. Instead of backing down, he straightened his shoulders and tightened his grip on Elena's hand. "Then I guess I'm dead to you, Margaret," he said quietly, "because I can't live like this anymore." The silence that followed William's declaration stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Margaret stood motionless, her face a mask of controlled fury and disbelief. Elena's hand trembled in William's grip, and he could feel the weight of what he had just done settling over them like a heavy blanket. "You'll regret this," Margaret said finally, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. "You'll wake up one morning and realize you threw away everything real for a fantasy." William felt a flash of doubt. Margaret wasn't wrong about the magnitude of what he was destroying. 15 years of marriage, a carefully built social life, shared investments and properties, mutual friends who would be forced to choose sides. The divorce would be complicated and expensive, potentially damaging to his business and certainly devastating to his reputation in certain circles. But then he looked at Elena, saw the genuine concern and kindness in her brown eyes, and remembered what it felt like to be around someone who brought out the best in him rather than demanding he become someone else entirely. "Maybe I will regret it," William admitted. "But I'll regret staying even more." Margaret's laugh was bitter and sharp. "You think she'll stay when things get difficult? You think this idealistic little girl will stand by you when the lawyers start circling and the money gets tight? You think she'll love you when you're not the successful CEO anymore?" Elena tried to pull her hand away from William's, but he held on. "Margaret, please," Elena said, finding her voice at last. "This isn't about me. This is between you and William." "Isn't it?" Margaret rounded on Elena with sudden fury. "You think you're innocent in all this? You think your sweet smiles and earnest conversations about making the world better weren't calculated to steal my husband?" "That's not true," Elena protested, her face flushing red. "I never intended—" "Of course you didn't," Margaret cut her off. "You just happen to be everything I'm not. Young, optimistic, full of purpose. How convenient." William stepped between the two women. "Stop it, Margaret. Elena didn't steal anything. You and I have been growing apart for years. Elena just helped me realize that I didn't have to accept being miserable." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of rage rather than sadness. "Miserable? Was our life really so terrible, William? The house? The success? The respect we built together?" "The things, Margaret. You're talking about things. What about love? What about laughter? When was the last time we laughed together about anything that wasn't cruel gossip about someone else?" Margaret wiped her eyes roughly, smearing her mascara. "Love doesn't pay for this house, William. Love doesn't build empires." "I thought you understood that." "I did understand it. That's the problem." William walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "I understood it so well that I forgot everything else mattered." Elena moved toward the door again. "I should really go. This is too much. I never wanted to be the reason for breaking up a marriage." "You're not the reason," William said, turning back to face both women. "Margaret and I broke our own marriage. We just did it so slowly that neither of us noticed until it was too late." Margaret suddenly seemed to deflate, sinking into her chair by the fireplace. The fight went out of her all at once, leaving her looking smaller and older than her 42 years. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we figure out how to untangle 15 years of shared life," William said. "We divide the assets, we tell our friends, we move forward separately." "And the business?" William hadn't thought about that yet. Hartford Industries was technically a joint venture. Though he had built it from the ground up, Margaret had contributed in the early years, but her involvement had lessened as her focus shifted to social climbing. "We'll work something out that's fair," he said. Margaret laughed bitterly. "Fair? What's fair about any of this, William? What's fair about you deciding our marriage is over without even trying to fix it?" "We've been trying to fix it for 2 years, Margaret. Every argument, every cold dinner, every night we went to bed angry. That was us trying to fix something that was already broken." Elena cleared her throat softly. I really think I should leave you two to work this out. This is too personal for me to be here. But as she moved toward the door, Margaret's voice stopped her again. No, stay, Margaret said, surprising both of them. I want to ask you something. Elena hesitated, then turned back. All right. Margaret studied Elena's face carefully. Do you love him? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena's face flushed red, and she glanced at William before looking back at Margaret. Elena struggled with the words. I care about him deeply. But Margaret, I swear to you, I never meant for this to happen. I never tried to come between you. That's not what I asked, Margaret said firmly. I asked if you love him. Elena was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with whether to answer honestly or diplomatically. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and met Margaret's gaze directly. Yes, she said simply. I do. Margaret nodded slowly, as if Elena's honesty confirmed something she already knew. And you, William? Do you love her? William didn't hesitate. Yes. More than you loved me? This time William did pause, and Margaret saw the answer in his hesitation. I love her the way I used to love you, he said carefully, before we both changed into people we didn't recognize. Margaret stood up, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. I see. She walked to the window, looking out at the rain. I suppose I should call my sister. I'll need somewhere to stay tonight. Margaret, you don't have to leave tonight. We can work out the details gradually. No, Margaret said firmly. I won't stay in this house knowing that you wish I was someone else. She turned back to face them. But I want you to know something, both of you. This won't be easy. Love doesn't solve everything, William. When the excitement wears off and real life sets in, you'll face the same challenges we did. Elena stepped forward. Maybe, but we'll face them as ourselves, not as people we're pretending to be. Margaret smiled sadly. You're very young, Elena. You still believe in fairy tales. And you've forgotten how to believe in anything, William said quietly. Margaret flinched, as if he had struck her. Perhaps I have. She walked to the door, then paused. I'll have my lawyer contact yours tomorrow. I assume you'll want to handle this as cleanly as possible. Margaret, William called as she reached the door. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help anything, but I am sorry it came to this. Margaret turned back one last time. So am I, William. So am I. After Margaret left, the study felt strangely empty, despite two people still being in it. William and Elena stood looking at each other, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. Are we crazy? Elena asked softly. William took her hands in his. Probably. But I'd rather be crazy with you than sane without you. Elena leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her. Outside, the rain was beginning to slow, and the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky. What happens now? Elena whispered. Now we see if love really is enough, William said. We see if two people who care about each other can build something better than what I had before. Elena pulled back to look at him. And if it doesn't work? Then at least we'll fail being ourselves instead of succeeding at being someone else. As the sun began to rise, they sat together by the dying fire, talking quietly about the future they would build together. They both knew that Margaret was right about one thing. Love alone wouldn't solve all their problems. The divorce would be complicated and painful. William's social circle would be divided. Elena would face whispers and judgment about being the other woman. But for the first time in years, William felt like himself again. And as Elena talked excitedly about turning the Morrison project into something that could actually help communities while still being profitable, he remembered what it felt like to dream about more than just accumulating wealth. The road ahead would be difficult, but they would walk it together. And sometimes, William thought as he watched Elena's eyes light up. While she described her vision for ethical business practices, sometimes the courage to choose authenticity over security is the most important decision a person can make. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the Hartford mansion. It would take months to sort out the legal details, and longer still to rebuild their lives. But in that moment, sitting together as the world woke up around them, both William and Elena felt something they hadn't experienced in years: hope.